Welcome to the lecture on contact and conquest. This is lecture two. And in this lecture, I'm going to be discussing some of the first European contact with what's known as the New World. And the New World is just really shorthand for North and South America and the Caribbean area. It's kind of referred to that because that's what Europeans saw it as. They saw it as a new world to explore, to exploit, and it makes it a lot easier for historians to say North, South America, and the Caribbean in one mouthful. It's a lot easier of a shorthand for that. So this is a discussion about encounters in the New World, and I call this one Contact and Conquest because mostly the first Europeans to really have a outsized effect on this new world territory is going to be the Spanish. So that's what we're going to be discussing today with this lecture is going to be Spanish conquest in the New World beginning in 1492, of course, with the voyages of Columbus. This is some pretty basic stuff. Just going over it. Christopher Columbus, he is an Italian mariner. He's an Italian guy. He's hired by the Spanish because he's pretty good at what he does. He's pretty smart. He knows what he's doing. And he has a different idea for how to reach Asia because the Spanish Empire really, really, really wants to reach Asia. They want to get themselves over there because that's where all the good trade is. Asia has spices, it has luxury goods, it has stuff that Europe does not have. And the Spanish Empire wants to grow itself, it wants to become prosperous. They really want that wealth, and they feel that they're going to get it by establishing trade relation with Asia, establishing a better foothold there. But it's a problem. How do you get from Spain to Asia? How do you get from Spain to China when it's the 1400s? You're not flying there. You're not walking there. Well, you can, but it's going to take a really long time. You're going to usually take a land route somehow. It's going to be usually by horse, by wagons, by cart, uh, by boat, maybe if you're going to cross the Mediterranean, but you still have to get through the Middle Eastern area. It's a lot of work and it's expensive. So the Spanish are thinking, here comes Christopher Columbus with this idea of going a sea route, going instead of picture kind of a map of the world in your head, instead of going right towards Asia, he's going to make a left. He's going to go west to get east. He's going to just go far west and hope to circle around and going to land in Asia by crossing the Atlantic. Because the idea is that there's nothing out there. It's just Africa, Europe, and Asia floating around there on the globe. So Columbus thinks if I travel west, if I cross the Atlantic, eventually I will come full circle. They're aware the world is a sphere. I will bump into Asia that way. Christopher Columbus is mistaken in two ways. He's mistaken in the fact that the world is a lot larger than he assumes. So even if North and South America were not there, he probably would have run out of provisions and just died out in the ocean if there weren't continents there. And of course, he did not anticipate said continents being right there. So in 1492, when Columbus is hired by Spain, he is heading out to find a sea route to Asia. He is hoping to land in Asia. He does not. I don't think he ever makes it there. Columbus goes west and he ends up landing his first expedition. He lands on the present day Bahamas and encounters an indigenous group known as the Taino or Arawak people. Quiz question number one. What was Columbus's goal when he first set out in 1492? So Columbus does that. He's out in 1492. He lands on the present day Bahamas and kind of think there's a little bit of there's some debate. Did he really think he landed in Asia? Did he realize he was in a new world? We're not getting into that. What we are getting into is what Columbus and his men were up to over there in the Caribbean. So some of the first settlements in that area were rife with conflict between the Spanish explorers and the indigenous population there. On that first voyage that Columbus made in 1492, his expedition ends up establishing the very first semi-permanent European settlement in the New World, and that settlement is an outpost known as the La Navidad outpost in 1492. What happened with the La Navidad outpost is that on this first voyage, Columbus and his men, they end up in the Bahamas area. They end up crashing their ship into present-day Haiti. They're sailing around. They've got, of course, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They ram the Santa Maria right into a bay in Haiti. They crash it, they wreck it. They do this on Christmas. And Columbus is standing there and says, okay, this ship is not going back to Europe. He leaves 40 men there with the wreckage of the Santa Maria, and he tells them, build an outpost. We'll be back in a few years. So that outpost ends up being La Navidad because it was around Christmas. It was on Christmas. And the 40 or so sailors that Columbus leaves behind set up this outpost, and they actually build a lot of the structures there on this outpost out of the wreckage of the Santa Maria. So Columbus leaves them there hoping that, okay, they will maybe find some gold, maybe convert the natives to Catholicism. He'll see when he gets back. When he returns back, it turns out La Navidad has been burned to the ground. The men are all gone because Columbus finds out that they had attempted to enslave the local people. They had attempted to exploit their labor to try to mine for gold. They'd made some enemies pretty quickly and were fairly quickly killed off. So the La Navidad outpost is not very long-lived. On his second voyage, Columbus attempts to establish another Spanish outpost on Haiti, well, what's present-day Haiti, and that second outpost is called La Isabela after the Spanish queen, and that's in 1494. That outpost doesn't last much longer than La Navidad because they have a very similar problem. The Spanish explorers attempting to enslave the local population, making enemies with them, as this engraving shows here, this etching. Pretty violent encounters. You've got the Spanish with their crossbows and the indigenous population also taking up weapons against them. Eventually, Columbus is forced to set up an outpost on the present day Dominican Republic, and that is a settlement that's known as Santo Domingo, which is established in 1498. And this outpost becomes pretty lucrative for the Spanish because it's in a tropical climate, and they are able to bring in enslaved Africans to grow sugarcane there and produce that for the Atlantic market. So, quiz question number 2. What was the name of the first settlement founded by Columbus? Now, Columbus is famous because he's one of the first major Spanish figures to arrive in this new world. But there are going to be a lot of other Spanish explorers that are going to really want to exploit the situation. They see there's something new out there. They want to take advantage of this. And the Spanish that are going to try to follow in his footsteps and try to find out more about what's out there are going to be known as conquistadors. And they are called that because their goal really is to conquer for Spain. They have a lot of other goals too. We'll get into those in a second. One of the most famous of the conquistadors was Hernan Cortez. He's pictured here. And in 1519, Cortez landed in Mexico and he encounters the indigenous Aztec people and is very quickly filled with the desire to, well, conquer them. Cortez and other conquistadors have 3 goals that really drive them, that really drive their desire to get to the New World and their desire to conquer. The 3 classic goals motivating Spanish explorers, Spanish conquistadors, are pretty easy to remember because they all start with the letter G. I love alliteration. It's my favorite. Letters the same. Ooh, perfect. The first one, of course, is glory. They really want to make history. They want to make a name for themselves. They want that fame. They want that awe. They want to be someone who discovers something, who explores something. So they want the glory. The first G is the glory that comes with the exploration. The other one that they want is gold. They want to be rich. They're hearing stories of fabulous wealth in South America and the Caribbean area, Latin America. They want to become fabulously wealthy. And of course, when Cortez encounters the Aztec, their cities are ripe with gold. They've got lots of gold jewelry and decor, and the Spanish want that for themselves. They want to become rich. They want to become rich personally. They want their own wealth to grow, but they also want to enrich the empire. The third G is God. We'll talk more about this shortly, but the Spanish really, really want to convert local populations to Catholicism. They want to increase the number of Catholics that are out there because they're feeling like it's going to just help their own empire to have more Catholics in that, more people united under the same religion. But there's also a religious motivation that, you're going to secure your own spot in heaven if you've converted lots and lots of souls and brought them over to God. So three G's of the conquistadors: glory, gold, and God. Cortez is particularly adept at conquering the Aztec Empire. By 1521, the Aztec Empire has fallen to the Spanish, mostly because the Spanish have superior weaponry and they also have some other things on their side. They have horses, and I know, I think if your computer looks anything like mine, my head is currently on the horse that's right here. So like I'm look like a talking horse right now. It's pretty funny from where I can see. I don't know if you can see it too the same way, but I like it. They have horses, and the horses are an incredible tool of war that the Spanish exploit heavily to their advantage. Horses are tall, they're very intimidating. If you ever get really close to a horse that's coming straight at you, you're moving out of the way. The horse is not. And the Spanish know that that is a terrifying prospect. Indigenous populations at this time have never seen a horse before. It is Europeans who introduced this species to North and South America. So the Spanish use this in really a campaign of terror against the Aztecs, as well as things like gunpowder, and they end up exploiting the diseases that the Europeans bring over, which we'll talk about momentarily. Okay, quiz question number 3. What were the 3 main goals of the Spanish conquistadors? So this Spanish conquest kicks off a process known as the Columbian Exchange, because Columbus kind of gets the credit for starting it, being the first major European to really bring European attention to North and South America. The Columbian Exchange is a transatlantic movement of goods, people, and disease back and forth. So it's an exchange crisscrossing the ocean, as you can see by the arrows here. Stuff starts moving back and forth, west and east, left and right, round and round. And all sorts of stuff is moving. Like I said, it's people, it's goods, agricultural products, animals, and disease. And there are positives and negatives to this. A lot of the positives end up being things that benefit Europeans. European population grows as a result of the Columbian Exchange. It grows because Europe gets a massive influx of some awesome agricultural products from the Americas. They get pumpkins, squash, potatoes, tomatoes. Oh, such good corn, yummy, awesome, love it. So much different products that are integral to the European diet come from the Americas. Could you imagine like Irish food, the Irish without the potato, or Italian food without the tomato? You couldn't, so don't bother. It comes from the New World. It starts with the Columbian Exchange. And the reason the European population grows is because they've got lots of new food to feed a population that can now grow because they have food. Potatoes turn out to be awesome at feeding poor people because they're nutrient rich, and you can grow a lot of them in a very small patch of land. This is why peasant populations start to grow. So Europe flourishes with this influx of good stuff that comes from the Americas. Both sides end up getting some invasive species. The Europeans end up bringing the dandelion over to North and South America that had never existed there until the Columbian Exchange. So next time you're wandering around and you see a dandelion poking up out of the sidewalk, I want you to think about this and think, wow, that dandelion would not have been there if it hadn't been for the Columbian Exchange. So there are a lot of things that Europeans bring too. They bring pigs, they bring horses, they bring lots of stuff over. And that is, I'm going to throw this out as quiz question number 4. What is the Columbian Exchange? What is it? Of course, now moving to the negatives of the Columbian Exchange. With all the people moving around, there's also going to be a lot of diseases making their way back and forth across the Atlantic, unintentionally. European diseases are going to be extremely detrimental to indigenous populations in the New World, mostly because the Europeans are going to bring something known as smallpox, and it's going to be particularly virulent in North America. Smallpox is a disease that is very deadly if you don't have an immunity to it. Europeans happen to have an immunity to it because it's believed to come from large livestock animals, things like horses and cows and sheep. Things that Europeans are around a lot. They end up building up an immunity to it. And when they bring their smallpox to North America, the local indigenous populations have not a single immunity built up to it. It is absolutely deadly. It tears through their populations and kills them off in droves. It's estimated that millions and millions of indigenous societies are wiped out. Indigenous people and their societies are flattened by this. They are just brought to their knees by how virulent smallpox is. And of course, the smallpox epidemics are exacerbated by European cruelty. The Spanish are working them very hard. They are enslaving the indigenous populations. They're not helping them at all with these disease outbreaks and epidemics. And a lot of times the Spanish are playing into it. They are, I don't want to say happy, but they're going to use it to their advantage. The fact that these local populations are suffering from these diseases. The Spanish use it as justification. They're thinking, wow, we must be stronger and better if something like this that doesn't really affect us is killing these people off. They make it seem, it almost seems to some Spanish conquistadors that this is the divine will of God, that the land is being cleared of another population to make way for Europe. Diseases do go the other way. Syphilis ends up coming back to Europe. Syphilis is a New World disease. Syphilis is sexually transmitted, and what it does is it's a little thingy, it's a little spiral disease, spiral-shaped spirosite, whatever they're called, that basically you get it from sexual contact, and eventually it crawls up into your brain, makes your body parts fall off, and you go insane and die. So diseases are going back and forth. So well, that is quiz question. I think we're up to number 5. There's going to be 10 total, so keep an eyeball out for those or an ear open for that. Number 5. What were some of the diseases exchanged during the Columbian Exchange? So the Spanish have brought a lot of diseases that are going to be extremely detrimental to the indigenous societies. And as I mentioned, it's going to be extremely harsh on their populations. I mentioned how it's exacerbated by Spanish cruelty and Spanish treatment. The Spanish are particularly cruel to indigenous populations they encounter because they are going after that G there, the gold. They want mineral wealth. And they are going to heavily exploit indigenous labor in order to extract wealth out of the earth. They are going to want to mine silver and mine gold, and they are going to work people to death in order to do that, in order to become wealthy. The Spanish nobility, the king, queen, the court, whatnot, they're not super happy when they learn about this, when they learn about how cruel the conquistadors are being to the indigenous societies they're encountering. Mostly because they're thinking, wow, we kind of wanted to convert these people to Catholicism. And if you are working them to death, you are not giving them a very positive picture of a Catholic. And also you're killing them off. We wanted these people to live and become Catholic and have children and have those children become Catholic. So the crown isn't super happy with this, hearing about this. So in 1512, the Spanish crown, the Spanish king, passes a law known as the Laws of Burgos. And what the Laws of Burgos does is it is a law that forbids the enslavement of native populations. So you're not allowed to enslave them. But the Spanish still need labor. They still want that gold. They still want the silver. So what the Laws of Burgos does is that even though it forbids enslavement, it establishes something known as the encomienda system. And this system says that, okay, you cannot enslave people, but you can apprentice them, which implies a bit more level of a playing field, that there's going to be some exchange. It's not going to be enslavement and extraction of labor. It's going to be a more balanced exchange. And what this does is the encomienda system says, okay, you have to provide some more benefits for your workers, and you have to provide them protection, education, and conversion. You have to give them something in exchange. You have to care for them a little bit better. Of course, that really doesn't work. Nobody listens to it. It's very hard to enforce. So the Spanish crown is forced to establish a slightly harsher law known as the New Laws of the Indies in 1542, which actually has a much longer name than that. I will read it to you. It is officially, the long official name of the new laws is New Laws of the Indies for the Good Treatment and Preservation of the Indians. So that's a mouthful. But as the name implies, it is designed to curtail some of the abuses that were running rampant under the encomienda system. So the new laws of the Indies establishes something called the repartimiento system. And what this is, it is a law that limits the amount of Spanish colonists that can have indigenous laborers working for them. It also establishes a shorter fixed time frame that you can have those workers laboring for you. So it puts a time limit on their work. They can only work for like a couple weeks of the year. They have to be paid, they have to be taken care of, and they have to be given a chance to convert to Catholicism. This is also hard to enforce, but it shows that the Spanish crown, the Spanish nobility, is trying. They are trying to do something about the rampant abuses going on in the New World, particularly in South America. Quiz question number 6. What was the laws of Burgos and what did it do? So, a little bit about religion. Why do I keep talking about Catholicism? Why is this so important when it comes to Spanish colonization and Spanish conquistadors in the New World? Religion is really important for almost everybody globally, but especially Europe and especially the Spanish in this century. The Spanish are particularly concerned about making more Catholics and having more Catholics in the world. And that is super evident in an action taken by the Pope in 1493, not long after the initial Columbian excursions into the Americas, so almost right after his encounter. Pope Alexander decides that Pope Alexander the Sixth, there's several of them, but this is the sixth one. Pope Alexander the Sixth does something in 1493 known as give a papal donation, which is official popely religious official Catholic permission for Spain to be the main colonizer of the Americas. And the reason that Pope Alexander the Sixth does that is because he is really hoping that the Spanish will lead the charge and make this a process of conversion where the Spanish are going to make lots and lots of Catholics. They're going to encounter lots and lots of people, and they are going to convert them to Catholicism. So the Pope basically like gives his Pope seal of approval on Spanish excursions and colonization because he wants to see them make more Catholics. But now, of course, you're probably thinking, why do they care so much? Do they want so many Catholics in the world? Catholicism feels like it's under attack, like it's being threatened in in this era. And because there's a lot of people unhappy with it. They're unhappy with the strictness, they're unhappy with just how it's being implemented. And that really comes to a head in 1517. And after this, the Spanish are going to be even more concerned, we'll say. But it all comes to a head in 1517 with something known as the Protestant Reformation. And with the Protestant Reformation, a religious figure, a German priest named Martin Luther, who's pictured down here in the small inset with the hammer pointing to the wall. Martin Luther, he was a German Catholic priest, and he gets really mad at Catholicism. He is furious with it. He can't stand it anymore. He wants to worship God. He wants other people to worship God, but he doesn't like how the Catholic Church is going about running religion, basically. He thinks that they have become extremely corrupt. According to Martin Luther, the Catholic Church is awful. They are doing things that true pious religious figures should not do. They're doing things like selling indulgences, which means that if you pay the church a certain amount of money to forgive you for your sins, you don't have to go to hell. You can buy your way out of hell. You just have to have enough money to do it. Martin Luther thinks that is ridiculous. You should not be able to buy a free ride out of hell. And he doesn't like how just pomp and circumstance and fancy and luxurious the Catholic Church has gotten. He thinks that they are just rolling in money. They're spending it on things that you shouldn't spend money on. They're buying giant gold statues. And that, according to Martin Luther and a lot of other Catholics, that's verging on like idol worship. Like that's kind of heretical. Like they don't really like that. That seems wrong. They don't like how much stuff there is. There's too much worship of things and like worshiping relics of saints that is taking away from the worship of God. So Martin Luther very famously nails a list of complaints to the door of a church, gets himself into a lot of trouble, and kickstarts a schism in Christianity that creates a religion known as Protestantism. And Protestantism gets its name from being a protest against the overindulgences and the eccentricities and overspending of the Catholic Church because they're protesting that. Protestantism's still alive and well. A lot of religions now are branches of Protestantism. Puritanism, things like that are going to emerge out of this. But that's going to scare the Spanish Catholics even more. The fact that, wow, there is now a full branch of religion dedicated to protesting the current practice of Catholicism. Okay, quiz question number 7. Why did Pope Alexander VI want the Spanish to colonize the New World? So the Spanish are also a little bit worried about their ability to convert indigenous populations to Catholicism because they're just really not helping themselves where they are in, especially in South America and the Caribbean. Part of it is because no matter what laws the crown tries to pass, it always seems like it never works. The Spanish colonists, the conquistadors, the big landowners, the miners, they enact some absolutely barbaric treatment of indigenous societies. And it will be religious figures horrified by this that try to draw attention to what the Spanish have done and are going to try to get them punished, to draw attention to this. In the 1520s, there's a Spanish priest called Bartolome de las Casas, and he publishes accounts of some of the really horrific atrocities that the Spanish have been committing against indigenous populations. He writes these stories about Spanish conquistadors throwing babies into fires, hanging women, hanging pregnant women, chopping off arms and legs and noses, burning people alive, locking them in homes and setting them on fire, setting dogs on infants, just really horrific behavior that was enacted against societies that maybe refused to become enslaved or weren't working hard enough to help the Spanish extract gold. But they're absolutely atrocious. And Las Casas, like many other religious figures, were absolutely horrified by this. Rightfully so, but also because it was a feeling that you're going to lose these people to not only because you're killing them, but you're losing potential converts to Catholicism and you're giving a very, very bad name to it. A lot of his accounts and interactions with Native societies, he's saying that these people don't want to go to heaven because they think that if that's where the Catholics are going, they don't want to be there. You're giving this religion a very, very bad name. It gets so bad that the Spanish become known for something that's referred to as the Black Legend. The Black Legend is this term applied to Spanish treatment where it is so bad, and the Spanish are so uniquely horrible, brutal, cruel, and atrocious to indigenous societies that their time there is called a Black Legend. It is the Black Legend of Spanish cruelty. And it's something that religious leaders tried very hard to bring attention to in order to try to change that behavior. It doesn't do a lot of good. It's it doesn't seem to change a lot of the behavior, but it does leave a historic record, a historic black legend of Spanish conquest as being uniquely brutal, and being a something that other European countries are going to almost use as justification for their own colonial efforts, because in their minds, no matter what they do, you can never be quite as bad as the Spanish were. So it's also going to justify conquest as well and settlement in the New World as well, thinking the Spanish aren't going to deserve this land. They're not going to deserve mineral wealth or any type of benefit from this because of how cruel they were to the people they encountered when they first arrived. Quiz question number 8. What was the Black Legend? And that was the 1520s. The Black Legend is comes as a result of Las Casas's writings. He writes about all these cruelties he witnesses, and it makes this the legend of extreme cruelty of the Spanish. And we see that doesn't really stop it. It just keeps on going. And now we're going to move on to the Southwest of North America because we're kind of trying to pull ourselves towards North America, where we're going to spend a lot of time looking because that's where the United States will eventually be founded. So we're going to move our geographic focus there. Spanish excursions, Spanish attempts to conquer and become wealthy also extend up out of South America, up into North America, into the Southwest, where we now think of as Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada. And the Spanish were a presence there in as early as the 1530s. And for a while, they were attempting throughout those decades to find gold and glory and convert people to God up in that territory. It's not very successful. They are not able to find a lot of easy access to wealth. It's very hot and dry, and they encounter a lot of hostile indigenous societies that they are hostile back to. A lot of hostility and a lot of violence going on. The Spanish don't really have too many large settlements up in the North American Southwest because they are not, they're much more focused on their colonies in South America. The exception to that is much later in the 1590s and 1598. A conquistador known as Juan de Oñate goes on an expedition determined to find gold and wealth. He ends up leading an expedition up the Rio Grande in present-day New Mexico, excuse me. But while he is on his expedition up the Rio Grande, he encounters the Acoma people, and you might know where this is going by now, attempts to enslave them in order to try to extract gold from the region. The Acoma end up trying to fight back against the Spanish. They kill a group of Spaniards, including Oñata's nephew. And in revenge for that small uprising of the Acoma, Oñata's group massacres hundreds of them. They end up killing 800 of the Acoma, women, children, you name it, and they take about 500 of them, they enslave them, and they cut the feet off of all of the men, leaving not a very good impression once again of Spanish colonialism. Once word of the Acoma massacre reaches the Spanish dignitaries in the area, Onata is kicked out. He is disgraced, and all of his people are forced to leave the area around the Rio Grande. Mostly because by the 1590s, the Spanish were trying pretty hard to escape the Black Legend, and Oñate was not helping with that. So, quiz question number 9. What caused the Acoma massacre? The Acoma uprising that eventually led to the massacre was not the only instance of indigenous resistance to Spanish colonialism. One incident that is particularly well documented is known as the Pueblo Revolt, and this is something that happens in the 1680s. So, a little bit of background. The Spanish were cracking down much harder by this time on religious adherence to religious doctrine, mostly because of the Spanish Inquisition. If you know anything about the Spanish Inquisition, they were really trying globally, anywhere in their empire, to make sure that everybody who said they were a Catholic was actually being a good Catholic. That was, they were trying heretics. They were attempting to purge those who were not practicing Catholicism correctly out of out. They were either killing them or attempting to torture them into practicing it the right way. So the Spanish Inquisition was a real attempt to make sure everyone is doing Catholicism right. And that bleeds over into their North American colonies. The Spanish in North America, particularly in the Southwest, the New Mexico area, were really trying to ensure that those native populations that said they were being Catholic were actually doing it the right way. And according to a lot of the Spanish that were there, they were not. The native Pueblo, it was mostly the Pueblo peoples that were populating the area. The Pueblo were not doing Catholicism right. They were more inclusivist, if you remember that, of their religion. They were saying they were Catholic, they were doing Catholic things, but they had retained a lot of their indigenous beliefs. They had simply adapted in some Catholic ones. That's unacceptable. During the Spanish Inquisition, that's heretical. They cannot allow that to stand. So the Spanish end up torturing, killing, and doing some pretty barbaric things to the Pueblo in an attempt to uh, assert that they need to change their ways, they need to purge their lives of any remaining indigenous practices and adopt true, pure Catholicism. So one of the Pueblo who had felt that he'd converted the right way to Catholicism was a leader known as Pope. It's spelled two different ways, depending on which version you're reading. And Pope had felt that, he thought he was a good Catholic, he thought he was doing it the right way. And he is horrified when the Spanish start burning native sacred objects, beating and whipping public religious figures. He's one of them. He gets publicly whipped for not doing Catholicism right. So Pope is infuriated, he is incensed, and decides he is going to lead an uprising against the Spanish for this cruel treatment. He gathers supporters, and they end up launching a surprise attack against the Spanish religious leaders and the Spanish colonists uh, who have been implementing the Spanish Inquisition, and they are very successful. The Pueblo Revolt kills over 500 Spanish settlers. They end up forcing the Spanish out of Santa Fe, and they have to totally abandon that settlement. Santa Fe becomes Pueblo, The Spanish cannot hold on to that settlement. It's a total victory for the Pueblo. They are very united behind the goal of getting rid of the Spanish. And the Spanish really they're not really going to be a presence much longer in this region after that. The Spanish Empire wanes, it gets pretty weak, and eventually the empires that will become dominant in North America are going to be the British and the French. So, final quiz question number 10. What caused the Pueblo revolt? So there were 10 quiz questions. Please upload your answers to those to the correct portal on Online Delhi and let me know if you have any questions. Take care.